Maravale stood barefoot in the center of Black Hollow's main square while her father counted coins beside a man who wouldn't meet her eyes. The morning air bit hard, and someone in the crowd laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that scraped across her skin worse than the cold. She didn't cry. She'd already learned that tears only made men meaner. Then Silas Creed stepped through the ring of onlookers, dropped a $1 on the auctioneer's table, and said her name like it mattered. If you want to see how far a woman can fall before she learns to stand again, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The morning Mara's father sold her, the sky over Black Hollow looked like dirty dishwater. She stood in the town square with her hands folded in front of her and a flour sack tied loosely over her head. The fabric was thin enough that she could see shapes moving beyond it, blurred figures, dark coats, the occasional flash of a woman's pale bonnet. She could hear everything. Boots on frozen dirt. Whispers that weren't whispers at all. The auctioneer clearing his throat like he was getting ready to sell a plow horse. Her father stood 3 feet to her left. She could smell the tobacco on him, sour and stale. He hadn't looked at her once since they'd left the house that morning. Mara Vale, the auctioneer announced, his voice flat and businesslike. 22 years old, healthy, able to work, no debts of her own, but she comes with a family obligation that needs settling. Someone in the crowd snickered. Mara's stomach twisted, but she kept her chin level. She'd spent the last 3 days preparing for this. She knew what would happen. She knew what people would say. And she knew that the only way to survive it was to stand still and let it wash over her like rain. Now, we ain't calling this a sale, the auctioneer continued, glancing toward the small cluster of men near the front. We're calling it an arrangement, a transfer of responsibility, if you will. The Vale family's got a debt to settle, and Miss Mara here's agreed to help settle it. That was a lie. Mara hadn't agreed to anything. She'd been told by her father, told by her mother, told by the man who held the debt. A slick-haired bastard named Barrett Crow, who ran half the businesses in Black Hollow and most of the dirt that came with them. Crow had made it clear. If the debt wasn't paid, Eli would disappear. Her baby brother. 15 years old and too stupid to know when he was being used. So, Mara had stood in the kitchen 2 nights ago while her father explained the arrangement, and she'd nodded because nodding was easier than screaming. Any offers? The auctioneer asked. Silence. Mara's hands started to shake, so she pressed them tighter together. She could feel the weight of eyes on her, heavy and wrong. The sack over her head wasn't just for modesty, it was to hide the scar. The one that ran from her left temple down to her jaw, pale and puckered and impossible to ignore. She'd gotten it when she was 16, when a horse spooked and kicked her into a fence post. The wound had healed badly, and the town had decided it made her unmarriageable. Now she was standing here, covered and silent, while men decided what she was worth. Come on now, the auctioneer said, his tone sharpening. She's a hard worker, knows her way around a kitchen, a garden, livestock. Won't cause trouble. Quiet girl. Another stretch of silence, then a voice from the back of the crowd, low, rough, and entirely unfamiliar. $1. The murmur that followed was immediate. Heads turned. Mara's breath caught. $1? The auctioneer repeated, his tone incredulous. Sir, I don't think... $1, the voice said again. Louder this time. Final. Footsteps approached. Slow, deliberate. The crowd parted. Mara couldn't see who was coming, but she felt the shift in the air. The whispers got quieter. Someone muttered a name she didn't recognize. Creed. The footsteps stopped in front of her. Mr. Creed, the auctioneer stammered. I suppose if no one else is offering... No one else is offering, the man said. His voice was deep, worn smooth in places and jagged in others, like a river rock that had been sitting in the sun too long. Mara tried to picture him and couldn't. She only knew the name, Silas Creed, a rancher who lived somewhere out past the ridge, a man people talked about in the same tone they used for thunderstorms and bad loans. All right then, the auctioneer said, clearly flustered. $1 it is. Mara heard the clink of the coin hitting the table. Miss Vale, Silas said. His voice was quieter now, directed at her. You can take the sack off. She hesitated. Go on, he said. Ain't nobody here got a right to keep you covered. Slowly, Mara reached up and pulled the flour sack off her head. The cold air hit her face, sharp and clean. She blinked against the sudden brightness and found herself looking at a man who didn't look away. Silas Creed was tall, broad-shouldered, and older than she'd expected. Maybe 40, with graying hair and a face that looked like it had been carved out of something hard. His eyes were pale, the color of winter sky, and they stayed on hers without flinching. He didn't stare at the scar, didn't even glance at it. He just looked at her like she was a person. "Can you ride?" he asked. Mara nodded. "Good," he said. "Got a horse waiting." He turned and started walking. Mara stood frozen for a moment, unsure if she was supposed to follow. Then Silas stopped, looked back over his shoulder, and said, "You coming or not?" She followed. The ride out to Silas's ranch took most of the morning. They didn't talk. Mara rode a chestnut mare that Silas had brought with him, and he rode a big gray gelding that looked like it could pull a wagon by itself. The trail wound through scrub pine and red rock, the kind of country that looked empty until you paid attention. Then you saw the hawks circling, the deer tracks in the dirt, the way the land folded in on itself like a kept secret. Mara kept her eyes on the horizon and tried not to think. She'd expected worse. Expected to be touched or spoken to like she wasn't human, or dragged off to some shack where she'd spend the rest of her life scrubbing floors and keeping quiet. But Silas hadn't touched her, hadn't even spoken to her beyond that first question. It made her nervous. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was high and the air had warmed just enough to stop biting. The house was small, sturdy, built from rough timber and stone. There was a barn, a pen for horses, a chicken coop, and a windmill that turned slow and creaky in the breeze. Everything looked functional. Nothing looked soft. Silas dismounted and led his horse toward the barn. Mara climbed down from the mare and stood there, unsure. "Barn's through there," Silas said without looking back. "Unsaddle her, brush her down, then come inside. There's stew on the stove." He disappeared into the house. Mara stared after him, then turned toward the barn. Her legs felt strange, like she'd forgotten how to walk. She led the mare inside, found a brush hanging on a nail, and got to work. The repetition helped. Brush, stroke, breathe. Brush, stroke, breathe. By the time she finished, her hands had stopped shaking. She walked to the house and paused at the door. It was open. She stepped inside. The interior was plain but clean. A wooden table, 2 chairs, a stove with a pot simmering on top, a narrow bed in the corner, neatly made. Silas stood at the stove, ladling stew into a bowl. "Sit," he said. Mara sat. He set the bowl in front of her, along with a spoon and a piece of bread. Then he ladled a second bowl for himself and sat across from her. They ate in silence. The stew was good. Simple, but good. Mara hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite. She ate slowly, carefully, and tried not to look at Silas, but she could feel him watching her. Finally, he spoke. "You got questions," he said. It wasn't a question. Mara swallowed. "Why did you buy me?" "Didn't buy you," Silas said. "Paid $1 to get you out of that square." "That's the same thing." "No," he said. "It ain't." Mara frowned. "What do you want from me?" Silas set his spoon down and leaned back in his chair. He looked tired, she realized. Not old, but worn. "I want you to work," he said. "Cook, clean, tend the animals. Same as anyone else who lives here." "And that's all?" His eyes sharpened. "You think I brought you out here for something else?" Mara didn't answer. Silas exhaled through his nose, a sound somewhere between frustration and resignation. "I don't touch women who don't want to be touched," he said. "And I don't keep people who don't want to stay. You do the work, you earn your keep. You want to leave? You leave. Simple as that." "Nothing's that simple," Mara said quietly. "Maybe not," Silas admitted. "But that's the deal. You got a roof, you got food, and you got your dignity. Nobody takes that from you here." Mara stared at him. She wanted to believe him. She wanted it so badly it hurt. "Why me?" she asked. Silas picked up his spoon again. "Because nobody else was going to." The first week passed in a haze of routine. Mara woke before dawn, fed the chickens, milked the cow, and started breakfast. Silas worked outside, mending fences, chopping wood, checking the horses. They ate together in silence, and then Mara cleaned while Silas disappeared into the hills. By the time he came back, she'd have dinner ready. They didn't talk much. Silas wasn't a talker, but he wasn't cruel either. He thanked her when she set his plate down. He told her when something needed fixing, and he never ever looked at her like she was broken. It was the strangest thing Mara had ever experienced. On the 8th day, she worked up the courage to ask about the town. "Do you go into Black Hollow often?" she asked over dinner. Silas shook his head. "Not unless I have to." "Why not?" "Don't care for it," he said simply. Mara hesitated. "Do you know a man named Barrett Crow?" Silas's jaw tightened. "I know of him." "He's the one who arranged the arrangement," Mara said carefully. "With my father." "Figured as much," Silas said. "You know what he does?" "I know enough." Mara looked down at her plate. "My brother, Eli. He got into trouble with Crow. Gambling debt. My father couldn't pay it, so Crow said he'd take Eli instead. Work him off. But my mother—" Her voice cracked. She stopped, swallowed, and tried again. "My mother begged. So Crow offered a different deal. If I went to the square, if I let them sell me, he'd forgive the debt. Let Eli go." Silas didn't say anything. "I don't know if he kept his word," Mara whispered. "I don't know if Eli's free or if I just gave myself up for nothing." Silas set his fork down. He looked at her for a long moment, and Mara couldn't read his expression. "I'll find out," he said. "What?" "I'll find out if your brother's free," Silas said. "And if he's not, I'll fix it." Mara stared at him. "You don't have to—" "I know," Silas said, "but I'm going to." But 3 days later, Silas rode into Black Hollow. Mara stayed at the ranch, her stomach twisted into knots. She tried to work, scrubbed the floors, baked bread, mended a tear in one of Silas's shirts, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She kept thinking about Eli, about her father's face when he told her what had to be done, about Barrett Crow's smile, thin and cold and sharp. Silas didn't come back until after dark. Mara was sitting at the table, a single candle burning in front of her, when he walked through the door. She stood immediately. "Well?" she asked. Silas's face was grim. He crossed to the stove, poured himself a cup of coffee, and drank half of it before he spoke. "Your brother ain't free," he said. Mara's knees buckled. She caught herself on the edge of the table. "Crow lied," Silas continued. "Eli's still working for him. Been working the stables behind Crow's saloon since the day you left. Crow told your father the debt was settled, but he kept Eli anyway. Said the boy owed him for room and board." Mara felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. "So I did it for nothing." "No," Silas said. "You did it because you didn't have a choice. That ain't the same thing." "What do I do?" Mara whispered. Silas set his cup down. "You let me handle it." "How?" "However it needs to be handled." Mara looked at him. There was something hard in his eyes now, something she hadn't seen before. It scared her, but it also made her feel safe. "You're going to get him back?" she asked. "I'm going to get him back," Silas said, "and I'm going to make sure Crow knows he can't do this again." "He's dangerous," Mara said. "He owns half the town." "I don't care," Silas said, and Mara believed him. Silas left at dawn the next morning. Mara watched him saddle his horse, load his rifle, and check the revolver at his hip. He moved with the kind of efficiency that came from years of doing hard things alone. "You be careful," Mara said. Silas glanced at her. "I will." "I mean it," she said. "If something happens to you." "Nothing's going to happen to me," Silas said. He swung up into the saddle and looked down at her. "And if it does, you take the horse and ride north. There's a town called Red Fork about 2 days from here. Ask for a woman named Clara. Tell her I sent you. She'll help." "Silas, just in case," he said. Then he rode out, and Mara was alone. She spent the day trying to keep busy. She cleaned the barn, fed the animals, baked more bread than they could eat in a week. But no matter what she did, her mind kept circling back to the same thought. What if he doesn't come back? By nightfall, she was pacing. By midnight, she was sitting at the table with her head in her hands, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. By dawn, she was standing in the doorway, staring at the empty horizon. And then, just as the sun broke over the ridge, she saw him. Silas rode slowly, his horse picking its way down the trail. And behind him, on a second horse, was a boy. Mara's breath caught. Eli. She ran. She didn't think, didn't plan, just ran down the path toward them. Silas saw her coming and reined his horse to a stop. Eli slid off his mount and stumbled forward, and Mara caught him in her arms. He was thinner than she remembered, dirtier. His clothes were torn, and there was a bruise on his jaw. But he was alive. Mara, he choked out, and then he was crying, and so was she. Silas dismounted and stood a few feet away, giving them space. When Mara finally looked up, her face wet and her chest heaving, Silas just nodded. He's safe, Silas said. Crow won't come after him. How did you— Doesn't matter, Silas said. It's done. Mara wanted to ask more. Wanted to know what Silas had said, what he'd done, what it had cost him, but the look in his eyes told her not to push. So instead, she said, "Thank you." Silas's expression softened, just barely. "Come on," he said. "Let's get him inside." Juan. That night, they sat around the table, Silas, Mara, and Eli. The boy ate like he hadn't seen food in days, and Mara kept refilling his plate, her hands steady now. Silas didn't say much, just watched them both with that same quiet intensity he always had. When Eli finally slowed down, Mara asked the question she'd been holding back. "Did Crow hurt you?" Eli shook his head. "Not much. Worked me hard, but he didn't do nothing worse than that." Mara exhaled. "He told me you were gone," Eli said quietly. "Said you'd been sold off and I'd never see you again. I thought—" His voice broke. "I thought it was my fault." "It wasn't," Mara said firmly. "None of this was your fault." "But You were 15, Mara said. "You didn't know what you were getting into. Crow tricked you. That's on him, not you." Eli looked down at his plate. Silas cleared his throat. "You can stay here," he said. "Long as you need. Work the ranch. Earn your keep. Same deal as your sister." Eli looked up, surprised. "You mean it?" "I don't say things I don't mean," Silas said. A slow, fragile smile crossed Eli's face. "Thank you, sir." Silas just nodded. Later, after Eli had fallen asleep on a bedroll near the stove, Mara stepped outside. The night was clear, the stars bright and endless. She heard the door open behind her and knew without turning that it was Silas. "You didn't have to do that," Mara said. "I know." "Why did you?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because you shouldn't have to carry it alone." Mara turned to look at him. In the moonlight, his face looked softer, less guarded. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You don't have to," Silas said. "Just stay, if you want to." Mara's throat tightened. "I want to." Silas nodded, and for the first time since she'd met him, he smiled. It was small, barely there, but it was real. And Mara felt something shift inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The first few weeks with Eli at the ranch felt like learning to breathe again after being underwater too long. Mara woke before dawn, as always, but now there was another set of boots by the door, another plate to set at the table. Eli threw himself into the work with the kind of desperate energy that comes from wanting to prove you're not a burden. He mucked stalls, hauled water, chopped wood until his hands blistered. Silas didn't coddle him, but he didn't push him past breaking either. He just worked alongside the boy, showing him how to mend a fence line or shoe a horse, his instructions spare and direct. Mara watched them from the kitchen window sometimes, her hands busy kneading dough or scrubbing pots, and felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. It took her a while to name it. Safety. Not the kind that came from walls or locks, but the kind that came from people who didn't leave. Still, there were cracks. Eli had nightmares. She'd hear him thrashing in his bedroll near the stove, muttering words she couldn't make out. She'd get up, cross the dark room, and sit beside him until he quieted. She never woke him. She just stayed there, her hand on his shoulder, until the demons let him go. Silas noticed but didn't say anything. That was his way. He saw things, understood things, but he didn't pry. Mara appreciated that more than she could say. One morning, about 3 weeks after Eli's arrival, Silas came in from the barn and found Mara standing at the stove, staring at nothing. "You all right?" he asked. Mara blinked, pulled back into the present. "Fine." Silas didn't move. "You sure?" She turned to look at him. He was covered in dust from the trail, his hat in his hand, his expression patient. He could wait all day if he had to. "I keep thinking about my parents," Mara said finally. "About what they did." "What about it?" "They haven't come looking for us," she said. "Not once. Eli's been here almost a month, and they haven't sent word. Haven't ridden out to check on him. Nothing." Silas set his hat on the table. "You want them to?" Mara's throat tightened. "I don't know. Part of me does. Part of me wants to hear them say they're sorry, that they didn't have a choice, that they—" She stopped, shook her head. "But they did have a choice. They could have fought harder. They could have done something else. Instead, they handed me over like I was a piece of furniture they didn't need anymore." "They were scared," Silas said quietly. "I was scared too," Mara shot back. "But I didn't sell anyone." Silas studied her for a moment, then nodded. "No, you didn't." Mara turned back to the stove, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "I don't want to see them again. That makes me a terrible daughter, doesn't it?" "Makes you human," Silas said. She glanced at him, surprised. "You don't owe them forgiveness," he continued, "and you don't owe them your time. They made their choices. You get to make yours." Mara felt something inside her loosen, just a little. "What would you do? If you were me?" Silas considered the question. "I'd let it sit. Give it time. See how you feel in a year, maybe 2. And if the answer's still the same, then you'll know it's the right one. And if it changes, then you deal with it then," Silas said. "Ain't no rush." Mara nodded slowly. It wasn't the answer she'd expected, but it was the one she needed. Eli came in then, his face red from the cold and his sleeves pushed up to his elbows. "Finished the fence on the south pasture," he announced. "Looks solid." Silas raised an eyebrow. "You checked the post on the corner, the one that was leaning?" Eli's face fell. No." "Go check it," Silas said. "If it's loose, reset it." Eli groaned but headed back outside without arguing. Mara watched him go, a faint smile tugging at her mouth. "He's a good kid," Silas said. "He is," Mara agreed. "Stubborn, though." "Runs in the family," Silas said, and there was just enough humor in his voice that Mara laughed. It was a small sound, soft and surprised, and it stopped her cold. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed. Before the square, certainly. Maybe before the debt. Maybe before the scar. Silas didn't comment on it, but she saw the way his expression shifted, just barely, like he'd heard something worth keeping. That evening, after dinner, Eli asked the question Mara had been dreading. "Do you think Ma and Pa are okay?" They were sitting around the table, the plates cleared and the fire burning low. Mara's hand stilled on the cup of tea she'd been holding. "I don't know," she said carefully. "You think Crow went after them? After Silas took me?" Silas, who'd been quiet up until now, leaned back in his chair. "Crow's a lot of things, but he's not stupid. He knows coming after your family would bring attention he doesn't want." "So they're safe?" Eli pressed. "Safe enough," Silas said. Eli looked down at the table. "I keep thinking I should go see them. Let them know I'm all right." Mara's chest tightened. "You don't have to do that." "They're still our parents," Eli said. "They're the people who put you in danger," Mara said, her voice sharper than she intended. "And then they stood by while I paid the price." Eli flinched. "I know, but—" "But nothing," Mara said. "You don't owe them anything, Eli. Neither of us do." "They were desperate," Eli said quietly. "People do stupid things when they're desperate." "Desperate or not, they made a choice," Mara said, "and I'm not ready to forgive them for it." Eli didn't argue, but the look on his face told her he didn't agree. He was younger. He still believed in second chances, in redemption, in the idea that love could fix broken things. Mara had believed that once too. Silas cleared his throat. "Eli, you want to see them? I won't stop you, but you go alone. Your sister doesn't have to be part of it." Eli looked at Mara, then nodded. "All right." Mara stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I need some air." She walked out before either of them could respond. The night was cold and clear, the kind of cold that made your lungs ache. Mara wrapped her arms around herself and stood in the yard, staring up at the sky. The stars were so thick out here, so bright that they almost looked fake, like someone had painted them on. She heard the door open behind her and knew it was Silas before he spoke. "You want to be alone?" he asked. "I don't know what I want," Mara said. Silas stepped up beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him, but not so close that it felt intrusive. They stood there in silence for a while, just breathing. "You're angry," Silas said finally. "I'm furious," Mara corrected. "At your parents?" "At everyone," Mara said. "At them, at Crow, at the whole damn town for standing there and watching like it was a show. At myself for not fighting harder." "You did everything you could," Silas said. "Did I?" Mara turned to look at him. "I just stood there, Silas. I let them cover my face and parade me around like I was nothing. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just stood there." "Because you were trying to save your brother," Silas said. "That's not weakness. That's the opposite." Mara shook her head. "It doesn't feel like strength." "It never does," Silas said. "Not at the time." Mara looked at him, really looked at him. In the moonlight, his face was all hard lines and shadows, but his eyes were soft, patient, like he had all the time in the world to wait for her to figure herself out. "Why are you so good to us?" she asked. Silas's jaw tightened. "I'm not good." "You are," Mara insisted. "You took us in. You brought Eli back. You've never asked for anything in return." "I asked you to work," Silas said. "That's not the same thing." Silas looked away, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. "I had a sister once," he said quietly. "Younger than me. She got into trouble with a man who promised her the world and delivered nothing but bruises. I didn't know about it until it was too late. By the time I found out, she was already gone." Mara's breath caught. "Gone?" "Left town in the middle of the night," Silas said. "No note, no word. I looked for her for 2 years. Never found her. Don't even know if she's still alive." Mara felt something crack open inside her. "Silas—" "I couldn't help her," Silas said, his voice rough. "But I could help you, so I did." Mara didn't know what to say. She wanted to reach out, to touch him, to offer some kind of comfort, but she didn't know if he'd want that. So instead she just stood there, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and let the silence hold them both. After a while, Silas spoke again. "You don't have to forgive your parents. You don't have to see them or talk to them or give them a damn thing, but don't let them take up space in your head rent-free. That's giving them power they don't deserve." Mara swallowed hard. "How do I do that?" "One day at a time," Silas said. "Same as everything else." The next morning, Eli rode into Black Hollow to see their parents. Mara didn't go with him, and Silas didn't push her to. She spent the day cleaning the house from top to bottom, scrubbing floors that didn't need scrubbing, and beating rugs that were already clean. It was easier to stay busy than to think. Eli came back just before sunset. He looked exhausted, his face pale and his eyes red-rimmed. Mara met him at the door. "How'd it go?" she asked. Eli dismounted and stood there for a moment, just staring at the ground. "They asked about you." "What did you tell them?" "That you were safe," Eli said, "that you were working for a good man, and that you didn't want to see them." Mara's chest tightened. "And?" "Ma cried," Eli said. "Pa just sat there. Didn't say much." "Did they apologize?" Eli hesitated. "Ma did. Pa didn't." Mara nodded slowly. It was about what she'd expected. "They want to see you," Eli said. "Ma especially. She said she's sorry. Said she didn't know what else to do." "She could have said no," Mara said flatly. "She could have told Crow to go to hell. She could have sold something, borrowed money, done anything except hand me over." "I know," Eli said. "I told her that." Mara looked at him, surprised. "I told her what you did for me," Eli continued. "Told her you gave up everything to save me, and they didn't even try to stop it. I said—" His voice cracked. "I said they didn't deserve you." Mara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back. "What did she say?" "She agreed," Eli said quietly. "She said she didn't deserve you, but she still wants to see you, just once, to say she's sorry." Mara turned away, her arms wrapped around herself. "I don't know if I can do that." "You don't have to," Eli said. I just thought you should know. Silas appeared in the doorway then, his presence steady and grounding. He looked at Eli, then at Mara, and seemed to understand the situation without needing an explanation. "Come on," he said to Eli. "Help me with the horses." Eli nodded and followed him toward the barn, leaving Mara alone. She stood there for a long time, staring at nothing, her mind spinning. Part of her wanted to see her mother, to hear the apology, to maybe, just maybe, find some kind of closure. But another part of her, the part that had stood in that square with a sack over her head, didn't want to give her parents anything. Not her time, not her forgiveness, not even her presence. She didn't know which part would win. That night, Mara lay awake in the small bed Silas had set up for her in the corner of the house. Eli was asleep by the stove, his breathing deep and even. Silas was outside, checking the animals one last time before turning in. The house was quiet except for the crackle of the fire and the occasional gust of wind rattling the shutters. Mara stared at the ceiling and thought about her mother's tears, her father's silence, and the weight of all the things left unsaid. She thought about Silas's sister, gone without a trace, and the way his voice had cracked when he talked about her. She thought about Eli, who still believed people could change, and about herself, who wasn't sure she believed in anything anymore. She heard the door open and close softly. Silas's footsteps crossed the room, slow and deliberate. He paused near her bed. "You awake?" he asked quietly. "Yeah," Mara said. "Can't sleep?" "Can't stop thinking." Silas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You want to talk about it?" Mara hesitated. "Not really." "All right." He started to move away, but Mara spoke before he could go. "Silas?" "Yeah?" "Do you ever regret it, taking us in?" Silas turned back toward her. In the dim firelight, she could just make out his silhouette. "No," he said simply. "Not even a little?" "Not even a little." "Why not?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because this house hasn't felt like a home in a long time. Not since my sister left. But now it does." Mara's throat tightened. "Because of us?" "Because of you," Silas said. And then, before she could respond, he added, "Get some sleep, Mara. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He walked away and Mara lay there, her heart pounding in her chest, trying to make sense of what he'd just said. The next few days passed in a blur of work and weather. A storm rolled in from the west, bringing rain and wind that battered the ranch for 3 days straight. Silas and Eli worked double time to secure the barn and reinforce the fences, while Mara kept the fire going and cooked enough food to feed an army. By the time the storm passed, they were all exhausted, but the ranch had held. On the 4th day, the sun came out, and the world looked scrubbed clean. Mara stood in the doorway, breathing in the sharp, rain-washed air, and felt something shift inside her. She couldn't name it, but it felt like letting go. Silas came up beside her, his sleeves rolled up and his hair damp from the rain. "You all right?" he asked. Mara nodded. "I think I am." He glanced at her, then looked out at the yard. "You make a decision? About your ma?" Mara took a breath. "I'm not ready to see her. Maybe I will be someday, but not now. And if that makes me a bad person, then I guess I'm a bad person." "It doesn't," Silas said. "It makes you someone who knows her limits." Mara looked at him. "You think I'll regret it?" "Maybe," Silas said honestly, "but I think you'd regret going before you're ready even more." Mara nodded. It was the truth, plain and simple, and she appreciated him for not sugarcoating it. Eli came around the corner then, mud splattered and grinning. "Fence is holding," he announced. "Didn't even budge." "Good," Silas said. "Now go clean up. You smell like a wet dog." Eli laughed and headed toward the pump. Mara watched him go, her heart swelling with something she couldn't quite name. "He's happy here," Silas said quietly. "He is," Mara agreed. "What about you?" Mara turned to look at him. His expression was open, unguarded in a way she wasn't used to seeing. "I think I'm getting there," she said. Silas nodded, and for a moment they just stood there, side by side, watching the world come back to life. That evening, after dinner, Silas brought out a deck of cards and taught Eli how to play poker. Mara sat at the table with them, sipping tea and watching as Silas patiently explained the rules. Eli was terrible at it, his face giving away every hand, but he laughed when he lost and didn't take it too seriously. At one point, Silas glanced at Mara and said, "You want in?" Mara shook her head. "I'll just watch." "Come on," Eli said. "It's more fun with three." Mara hesitated, then sighed. "Fine, but I don't know how to play." "That's all right," Silas said, dealing her in. "You'll learn." And she did. Slowly, carefully, with Silas guiding her through each hand and Eli teasing her when she made a mistake. By the end of the night, she'd won 2 hands and lost 5, and her face hurt from smiling. As they cleaned up the cards, Eli yawned and said, "I like this. The 3 of us. It feels right." Mara's chest tightened. "Yeah," she said softly. "It does." Silas didn't say anything, but when Mara glanced at him, she saw the faintest hint of a smile on his face. Later that night, after Eli had gone to sleep, Mara stepped outside again. The air was cool and clean, and the stars were bright overhead. She heard the door open behind her and knew without looking that it was Silas. "You've got a habit of standing out here," he said. "It's quiet," Mara said. "I like the quiet." Silas stepped up beside her, his hands in his pockets. "You thinking about your ma again?" "No," Mara said. "I'm thinking about you." Silas went still. "What about me?" Mara turned to face him. "Why don't you ever talk about yourself? You know everything about me and Eli, but I don't know anything about you." "Not much to know," Silas said. "I don't believe that." Silas exhaled a long, slow breath. "What do you want to know?" "Anything," Mara said. "Everything. Why you live out here alone. Why you don't go into town. Why you—" She stopped, searching for the right words. "Why you're so good at being alone." Silas looked away, his jaw tight. "I wasn't always alone." "Your sister?" "Her," Silas said. "And my wife." Mara's breath caught. "You were married?" "Long time ago," Silas said. "She died in childbirth. Baby didn't make it either." Mara felt like the ground had dropped out from under her. "Silas, I'm so sorry." He shook his head. "It was a long time ago." "That doesn't make it hurt less." Silas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "No, it doesn't." Mara wanted to say something, to offer some kind of comfort, but she didn't know what. So instead she just reached out and took his hand. His fingers were rough, calloused, but they closed around hers gently. They stood there like that for a long time, hands linked, staring up at the stars. And for the first time in a long time, Mara didn't feel alone. The morning after Silas told her about his wife, Mara woke with a strange heaviness in her chest. Not sadness exactly, but something close to it. Understanding, maybe, or just the weight of knowing someone better than you did the day before. She dressed quietly and went to the kitchen to start breakfast. Eli was already up, hauling firewood from the stack outside. Silas was nowhere to be seen, which wasn't unusual. He liked to check the animals early before the sun got too high. Mara was frying eggs when she heard raised voices outside. She froze, the spatula halfway to the pan, and listened. One voice was Silas's, low and controlled. The other was unfamiliar, younger, sharper, and laced with something that sounded like anger. She set the spatula down and moved to the window. A man on horseback was in the yard, his clothes too fine for ranch work, his hat tilted at an angle that looked almost mocking. Silas stood a few feet away, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Mara didn't recognize the man, but something about the way he sat, arrogant, entitled, made her stomach twist. Eli appeared at her elbow. "Who's that?" "I don't know," Mara said. They watched as the man gestured sharply, his voice rising. Silas didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there like a stone wall waiting for the storm to blow itself out. Finally, the man spat something that Mara couldn't hear, yanked his horse around, and rode off. Silas watched him go, then turned and walked back toward the house. His face was hard. Mara met him at the door. "Who was that?" "Nobody," Silas said. "Didn't look like nobody." Silas brushed past her and went to the stove, pouring himself a cup of coffee. His hands were steady, but there was tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. "Silas," Mara said. He took a long drink, then set the cup down. Barrett Crow's son. Mara's blood went cold. What did he want? "Said his father wants to talk," Silas said. "Wants to settle things like civilized men." "Settle what?" Eli asked, stepping forward. I'm out. The debt's done. It's not about the debt, Silas said. It's about me embarrassing him. Mara felt a chill run through her. What did you do? When you got Eli back? Silas's jaw tightened. I made it clear that if he touched your brother again, I'd burn his saloon to the ground with him inside it. Eli's eyes widened. You said that? I meant it, Silas said flatly. Mara stared at him, her mind racing. And now he wants to settle things. He wants to save face, Silas corrected. Crow's the kind of man who can't stand being made to look weak. So he's going to push until he gets what he wants. Which is what? Mara asked. Me gone, Silas said. Or dead. Whichever's easier. The room went silent. Mara felt the floor tilt under her feet. You can't go into town. I'm not planning to, Silas said. But his son just invited you, Eli said. Invited's a strong word, Silas said, more like baited. So what are you going to do? Mara asked. Silas looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something close to uncertainty in his eyes. I don't know yet. That uncertainty terrified her more than anything else could have. The next few days were tense. Silas didn't go into town, but he didn't relax either. He kept his rifle close, checked the property lines twice a day, and told Eli to stay within sight of the house. Mara found herself jumping at every sound, a horse whinnying, a door creaking, the wind rattling the shutters. She tried to keep busy, but it was hard to focus. Every time she looked at Silas, she saw the weight he was carrying, and it made her chest ache. On the third night, she found him outside, sitting on the porch steps with his rifle across his knees. The moon was high and bright, casting long shadows across the yard. You're going to freeze out here, Mara said. Silas glanced at her, but didn't answer. Mara sat down beside him, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. You think he's going to come here? Maybe, Silas said. Maybe not. Crow's not stupid. He knows I'm ready for him. But you can't stay ready forever, Mara said. No, Silas agreed. I can't. Mara looked at him, her heart pounding. So what are you going to do? Silas was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I'm going to finish it. How? By going to him, Silas said, before he comes to me. Mara's stomach dropped. That's suicide. Not if I do it right, Silas said. And if you don't? Silas turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. Then you and Eli take the horses and go north, like I told you before. Mara shook her head. I'm not leaving. Mara, I'm not, she said firmly. I don't care what you say. I'm not running again. Silas's jaw tightened. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment you brought Eli back, Mara said. You did that for me. For us. So don't you dare tell me this isn't my fight. Silas stared at her, and for a moment, Mara thought he was going to argue. But then something in his expression shifted, softened, and he looked away. You're stubborn, he muttered. I learned from the best, Mara said. Despite himself, Silas smiled. It was faint, barely there, but it was real. They sat in silence for a while, the cold air pressing in around them. Finally, Mara spoke again. What's your plan? Silas exhaled slowly. Crow's got power because people are afraid of him. He controls the debts, the businesses, the people who owe him favors. But fear only works if you let it. If I can take that away from him, he's got nothing. How do you take away fear, Mara asked. By showing people he's not untouchable, Silas said. By making him look like what he is, a bully who hides behind other people's desperation. Mara frowned. That sounds dangerous. It is, Silas admitted, but it's the only way. When are you going? Mara asked quietly. Tomorrow, Silas said. Mara's breath caught. That soon? The longer I wait, the more time he has to plan, Silas said. I need to move first. Mara felt panic rise in her chest. What if something goes wrong? Silas looked at her, and his expression was so calm, so sure, that it almost hurt. Then you and Eli keep going. You build a life. You don't look back. Silas, promise me, he said. Mara's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to scream, to tell him he was being an idiot, but the look in his eyes stopped her. I promise, she whispered. Silas nodded, then stood and walked back into the house, leaving Mara alone in the cold. She sat there for a long time, staring at the empty yard, her mind spinning. She thought about Silas riding into town alone, facing Barrett Crow, and whatever men he had waiting. She thought about the wife he'd lost, the sister he couldn't save, and the way he'd taken her and Eli in without asking for anything in return. And she thought about the fact that somewhere along the way, she'd started to care about him. Not just as a protector or a provider, but as a person, as someone she didn't want to lose. The realization hit her like a punch to the chest. She stood, pulled her shawl tighter, and went inside. The next morning, Silas was up before dawn. Mara woke to the sound of him moving around the house, checking his rifle, filling his canteen, pulling on his coat. She got up quickly and met him in the main room. "You're really doing this," she said. "I am," Silas said. Eli appeared from his bedroll, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "What's going on?" "Silas is going into town," Mara said. Eli's face went pale. "To see Crow?" "To finish this," Silas said. "One way or another." "I'm coming with you," Eli said immediately. "No," Silas said. "But no," Silas repeated, his voice hard. "You stay here with your sister. You keep the rifle loaded and the doors locked. If I'm not back by sundown, you do what I told Mara. You take the horses and you go." Eli looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Silas's expression stopped him. He nodded, his jaw tight. Silas turned to Mara. "You take care of him." "I will," Mara said. Silas hesitated like he wanted to say something else, but then he just nodded, picked up his rifle, and walked out the door. Mara followed him to the yard. The sky was just starting to lighten, the world caught in that strange gray space between night and morning. Silas mounted his horse and looked down at her. "If I don't come back," he started. "You're coming back," Mara said firmly. Silas's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You sound pretty sure about that." "I am," Mara said. And then before she could stop herself, she added, "Because you promised me dignity, and I'm not done needing it yet." Silas stared at her, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he nodded once, turned his horse, and rode out. Mara stood there until he disappeared over the ridge, her heart pounding in her chest. The day crawled by like a wounded animal. Mara tried to keep busy, baking bread, scrubbing floors, mending clothes, but her hands shook and her mind wouldn't settle. Eli paced the house like a caged wolf, checking the windows every few minutes, his face tight with worry. "He's going to be fine," Mara said, more to herself than to Eli. "You don't know that," Eli said. "I know Silas," Mara said. "He's smart. He's careful. He won't do anything stupid. He's riding into a town full of people who hate him to face a man who wants him dead," Eli said. "That's the definition of stupid." Mara couldn't argue with that. By midday, her nerves were frayed to nothing. She stood at the window, staring at the empty trail, willing Silas to appear. But the trail stayed empty, and the sun climbed higher, and the silence pressed in like a living thing. Eli came up beside her. "What do you think he's doing right now?" "I don't know," Mara said. "Do you think he's okay?" "I hope so," Mara said quietly. Eli was silent for a moment, then he said, "I like him. Silas, I mean. He's a good man." "He is," Mara agreed. "Do you?" Eli hesitated. "Do you care about him? Like, more than just, you know?" Mara's chest tightened. "I don't know what you're asking." "I think you do," Eli said. Mara looked at her brother, and for a moment she saw the boy he used to be, curious, hopeful, too young to understand how complicated the world really was. But he wasn't that boy anymore. He'd grown up fast, the way people did when they had to. "Yeah," she said finally. "I care about him." Eli nodded, like that was the answer he'd been expecting. "Good. I think he cares about you too." Mara didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything at all. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon when Mara heard the sound of hoofbeats. She and Eli both froze, then rushed to the window. A single rider was coming up the trail, moving fast. Mara's heart leapt into her throat. "Is that him?" Eli squinted. "I think so." They ran outside. The rider was close enough now that Mara could make out his shape. Tall, broad-shouldered, familiar. Silas. He was alive. Mara felt her knees go weak with relief. She grabbed the porch railing to steady herself as Silas rode into the yard and dismounted. He looked exhausted, his face pale and his clothes dusty, but he was whole, unharmed. "What happened?" Eli asked, rushing forward. Silas handed him the reins. "Put the horse up. I'll explain inside." Eli took the reins and led the horse toward the barn, glancing back over his shoulder every few steps. Mara stood frozen on the porch, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Silas walked toward her, his steps slow and deliberate. When he reached the porch, he stopped and looked up at her. "You're all right," Mara said. It wasn't a question. "I'm all right," Silas confirmed. Mara felt something crack open inside her. Before she could stop herself, she stepped down and wrapped her arms around him. It was clumsy, awkward, her hands gripping his coat like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. Silas went still for a moment, surprised. Then his arms came up around her, tentative at first, then firmer. They stood like that for a long moment, neither of them speaking. Mara could feel his heart beating against her cheek, steady and strong, and it was the most reassuring thing she'd ever felt. Finally, she pulled back, her face hot. "Sorry, Don't apologize," Silas said quietly. Eli came back from the barn then, his face eager. "So, what happened?" Silas gestured toward the house. "Inside. I'll tell you both." They gathered around the table and Silas poured himself a cup of water before he spoke. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it that Mara hadn't heard before. "Crow was waiting for me," Silas said. "Had half a dozen men with him, all armed. Thought he was going to scare me into backing down." "What did you do?" Mara asked. "I didn't give him the chance," Silas said. "I walked right into his saloon in front of everyone and I told him exactly what I thought of him." Eli's eyes widened. "In front of everyone?" "Everyone," Silas confirmed. "I told them how he tricked your family, how he used Eli to manipulate Mara, how he's been bleeding this town dry for years. I laid it all out, plain as day." "And he just let you?" Mara asked. "He tried to shut me up," Silas said, "but I didn't give him the chance. I told the room that Crow's power comes from fear, and fear only works if people believe the threat. I told them he's a coward who hides behind other people's desperation." "What did people say?" Eli asked. "Nothing at first," Silas said. "But then one man spoke up, said Crow had been squeezing him for months over a debt he'd already paid. Then another man said the same thing, and another. By the time I left, half the room was talking, and Crow was standing there with his mouth shut and his face red." Mara stared at him. "You turned them against him." "I gave them permission to stand up," Silas corrected. "They did the rest." "So what now?" Eli asked. "Is it over?" Silas's expression darkened. "Not yet. Crow's not going to let this go. He's going to come after me, and when he does, it's going to get ugly." Mara's stomach twisted. "So you just made it worse?" "No," Silas said. "I made it public, and that changes everything. Crow can't move against me without everyone knowing why. That limits what he can do." "But it doesn't stop him," Mara said. "No," Silas admitted. "It doesn't." The silence that followed was heavy. Mara felt her brief moment of relief crumble under the weight of what was still coming. Silas had won a battle, but the war wasn't over. "What do we do now?" she asked quietly. "We wait," Silas said, "and we stay ready." That night, Mara couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. Every creak of the house made her jump. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. She kept picturing Crow's men riding up to the ranch, torches in hand, fury in their eyes. Finally, she gave up and got out of bed. She crossed the dark room and found Silas sitting at the table, a single candle burning in front of him. His rifle was within arm's reach. "Can't sleep either?" Mara asked. Silas glanced at her. "Not much point." Mara sat down across from him. "Do you think he'll come tonight?" "I don't know," Silas said, "but I'm not taking chances." Mara nodded. They sat in silence for a while, the candlelight flickering between them. "I'm sorry," Mara said finally. Silas frowned. "For what?" "For dragging you into this," Mara said. "If you hadn't taken us in, none of this would be happening." "That's not true," Silas said. "Crow's been a problem long before you showed up. I just gave him a reason to focus on me." "Still," Mara said, "you didn't have to do any of this." Silas looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Yes, I did." Why? Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Because I've spent the last 10 years watching bad things happen to good people and doing nothing about it. And I'm tired of it. Mara felt something tighten in her chest. You're not doing nothing now. No, Silas agreed. I'm not. Mara reached across the table and took his hand. His fingers were rough and warm, and they closed around hers gently. Whatever happens, she said, I'm with you. Silas looked at their joined hands, then back at her. You don't have to be. I know, Mara said, but I am anyway. Silas's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Stubborn. You already said that, Mara said. Bears repeating, Silas said. They sat there in the candlelight, hands linked, and for the first time all day, Mara felt something close to calm. 2 days later, Crow made his move. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't quiet, and it sure as hell wasn't legal. Mara was in the kitchen when she heard the sound of horses. A lot of them. She dropped the dish she was holding and ran to the window. 6 men on horseback were riding up to the ranch, and at the front was Barrett Crow himself, a lean, sharp-faced man with eyes like chips of ice. Silas! Mara shouted. Silas appeared from the barn, Eli right behind him. He took one look at the riders and his expression went hard. Get inside, he said to Mara. Lock the door. I'm not... Now, Mara. There was something in his voice that brooked no argument. Mara ran inside, her heart pounding. She locked the door and grabbed the rifle Silas kept by the window. Her hand shook as she loaded it. Through the window, she watched as Crow and his men stopped in the yard. Crow dismounted slowly, deliberately, like he had all the time in the world. Silas Creed, Crow called out. His voice was smooth, almost pleasant. We need to have a conversation. Say what you came to say, Silas said. He stood in the center of the yard, unarmed but unafraid. You embarrassed me, Crow said. In front of the whole town. Made me look weak. You made yourself look weak, Silas said. I just pointed it out. Crow's smile didn't reach his eyes. You've got a smart mouth, Creed, but smart mouths don't last long out here. Is that a threat? Silas asked. It's a promise, Crow said. You've got 2 choices. You leave Black Hollow and you don't come back, or you pay the price for what you did. And what price is that? Silas asked. Crow gestured to the ranch. This place burns to the ground, and everyone in it. Mara's blood went cold. She raised the rifle, her finger on the trigger, her hand shaking so hard she could barely aim. But Silas didn't flinch. He just looked at Crow and said, You touch this place, and I'll kill you myself. Crow laughed. You and what army, Creed? Don't need an army, Silas said. Just need you to make one wrong move. The silence that followed was thick and dangerous. Crow's men shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward their guns. Mara's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Then, from behind Crow, a new voice spoke. Barrett. Everyone turned. A man on horseback was riding up the trail, older, gray-haired, with a badge pinned to his chest. The sheriff. Crow's expression soured. This doesn't concern you, Marshal. It does if you're threatening to burn down a man's property, the sheriff said. He rode into the yard and stopped beside Silas. I got word you were riding out here. Thought I'd come see what the fuss was about. No fuss, Crow said smoothly. Just a friendly conversation. Didn't sound friendly to me, the sheriff said. He looked at Silas. You all right, Creed? I'm fine, Silas said. The sheriff turned back to Crow. I think it's time you and your boys head back to town, Barrett. Crow's jaw tightened. This isn't over. Yeah, the sheriff said. It is. For a long moment, Crow just stared at Silas. Then he smiled, a thin, cold smile that made Mara's skin crawl, and turned his horse around. Let's go, he said to his men. They rode out, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Mara lowered the rifle, her hands still shaking. She unlocked the door and stepped outside. Silas was talking to the sheriff, his expression tight. Thank you, Silas was saying. Don't thank me yet, the sheriff said. Crow's not done. He's just waiting for a better opportunity. I know, Silas said. The sheriff tipped his hat and rode off, leaving Silas standing alone in the yard. Mara walked over to him. Are you okay? I'm fine, Silas said. You don't look fine, Mara said. Silas exhaled slowly. his shoulders sagging. He's not going to stop. I know, Mara said quietly. Silas looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked tired. Not just physically, but deep down bone tired. I don't know if I can keep doing this, he admitted. Mara reached out and took his hand. You don't have to do it alone. Silas looked at their joined hands, then back at her, and slowly, carefully, he nodded. That night, none of them slept well. Eli kept the rifle by his bedroll and jerked awake at every sound. Mara lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the moment Crow had threatened to burn the place down with them inside. And Silas sat at the table until dawn, a cup of cold coffee in front of him and his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the window. When morning finally came, it felt less like a new day and more like a temporary reprieve. Mara made breakfast in silence, her hands moving through the familiar motions while her thoughts churned. Silas ate without tasting, and Eli pushed his food around his plate like he'd forgotten what it was for. We can't keep living like this, Mara said finally. Silas looked up. I know. So what do we do? Eli asked. Silas set his fork down. I've been thinking about that. And? Mara prompted. Crow's got power because people owe him, Silas said. Money, favors, fear. He's built a whole system around it. But systems break when you pull the right thread. What thread? Mara asked. His credibility, Silas said. Right now, people are starting to talk. They're questioning him, but talk is cheap. What we need is proof. Something solid that shows everyone what he really is. Proof of what? Eli asked. That he's been falsifying debts, Silas said, charging people for loans they already paid off, keeping records that don't match what actually happened. If we can get our hands on his books, we can prove it. Mara's stomach dropped. You want to steal from him? I want to expose him, Silas corrected. There's a difference. Not to Crow there isn't, Mara said. If he catches you, he won't, Silas said. You don't know that, Mara said, her voice rising. You're talking about breaking into his office and taking his records. That's not embarrassing him in public. That's a hanging offense. Only if I get caught, Silas said calmly. And if you do? Silas met her eyes. Then you and Eli do what I told you. You leave. Mara stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Stop saying that. Stop acting like you're already dead. I'm not. Yes, you are, Mara said. Every time you talk about this, you talk like you're not coming back, like it's already decided. Silas stood too, his expression tight. I'm trying to be realistic. You're trying to be a martyr, Mara shot back, and I'm tired of it. They stared at each other across the table, the air between them crackling with tension. Eli looked from one to the other, clearly unsure whether to intervene or flee. Finally, Silas spoke, his voice quieter. What do you want me to do, Mara? Sit here and wait for him to come back? Wait for him to burn this place down or hurt you or Eli? I can't do that. I want you to stop acting like you're the only one who gets to make decisions, Mara said. This affects all of us, not just you. Silas's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. If you're going to do this, Mara continued, then we do it together, all three of us. No, Silas said immediately. Yes, Mara said. You want to get his books? Fine, but you're not doing it alone. Mara, I mean it, Mara said. You go into that town without backup, and you're as good as dead, but if we go together, we have a chance. Silas looked at her like she'd lost her mind. You want to break into Barrett Crow's office. I want to help you, Mara said. There's a difference. Silas turned to Eli. Talk some sense into her. Eli shrugged. I think she's right. Silas stared at him. You're supposed to be on my side. I am, Eli said. That's why I'm saying we should go with you. Silas looked between them, clearly searching for an argument that would stick. But Mara knew she had him. He could face down Crow and his men without flinching, but he couldn't say no to her when she looked at him like this. Fine, Silas said finally. But if anything goes wrong, you run, both of you. No arguments. Deal, Mara said. Silas exhaled, long and slow, like he was already regretting this. We'll go tomorrow night, after dark. Crow keeps his office above the saloon. There's a back staircase we can use. How do you know that? Eli asked. I've been watching the place for years, Silas said, just in case. Mara felt a chill run through her. You've been planning this. Not planning, Silas said, preparing. There's a difference. The next day passed in a haze of preparation and dread. Silas went over the plan 3 times, making sure they all knew their roles. Mara would keep watch at the bottom of the stairs. Eli would stay with the horses, ready to move if things went bad. Silas would go into the office, find the books, and get out. Simple, clean, dangerous as hell. By the time the sun set, Mara's nerves were stretched so tight she thought they might snap. She dressed in dark clothes, braided her hair back, and tried to ignore the way her hands shook as she tied her boots. Silas came over to her as she was checking the small knife she kept in her belt. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do, Mara said. Why? Mara looked up at him. Because you matter to me, and I'm not letting you do this alone. Silas's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering across his face before he could hide it. Mara, don't, Mara said softly. Don't try to talk me out of it. We're past that. Silas nodded slowly. Then, without warning, he reached out and pulled her into his arms. It was quick, almost clumsy, but it was real. Mara leaned into him, her face pressed against his chest, and for just a moment, she let herself believe that everything was going to be okay. When they pulled apart, Silas's eyes were darker than she'd ever seen them. Stay close to me, and if I tell you to run, you run. Understand? I understand, Mara said. They rode into town under the cover of darkness, taking the long way around to avoid the main road. The streets of Black Hollow were quiet, most of the townspeople already in bed. The saloon was the only building still lit, music and laughter spilling out into the night. Silas led them to an alley behind the saloon, where the back staircase climbed up to the 2nd floor. He dismounted and handed his reins to Eli. Stay here, Silas said. If you see anyone coming, whistle twice. Got it? Eli nodded, his face pale but determined. Silas turned to Mara. You're with me. They climbed the stairs slowly, careful to avoid the creaky boards. At the top there was a narrow landing and a single door. Silas tested the handle. Locked. He pulled a thin piece of metal from his pocket and worked it into the lock. Mara held her breath, her heart pounding so loud she was sure someone would hear it. After what felt like an eternity, the lock clicked and the door swung open. They slipped inside. The office was small and cramped, lit only by the moonlight filtering through a grimy window. There was a desk covered in papers, a filing cabinet in the corner, and a safe built into the wall. Silas went straight for the filing cabinet. Mara stood by the door, listening. Downstairs, the music continued, punctuated by bursts of laughter and the occasional shout. She could hear footsteps moving around below them, the creak of floorboards, the clink of glasses. How's it going? She whispered. Almost there, Silas muttered. He was rifling through files, his movements quick and efficient. He keeps everything organized, makes it easier. Or it's a trap, Mara said. Could be, Silas admitted, but we're already here. Mara heard a sound on the stairs, a footstep, maybe, or just the wind. Her hand went to the knife at her belt. Silas, I heard it, he said, not looking up. Keep watching. Mara moved closer to the door, peering through the crack. The staircase was empty, but she could see a shadow moving at the bottom. Someone was there. Silas, we need to go, she hissed. 1 more minute, Silas said. The shadow moved closer. Mara's pulse spiked. We don't have a minute. Silas grabbed a ledger from the cabinet and tucked it under his arm. Got it, let's move. They slipped out of the office and down the stairs, moving as quickly as they dared. Halfway down, Mara heard voices, loud, angry, getting closer. She grabbed Silas's arm. Someone's coming. Silas pulled her into the shadows beneath the staircase just as 2 men rounded the corner. They were talking, their voices slurred with drink, and they didn't notice Silas and Mara pressed against the wall in the darkness. The men climbed the stairs, still talking, and disappeared into the office. Mara and Silas waited, barely breathing, until the footsteps faded. Then they ran. They reached the alley where Eli was waiting with the horses. His face was tight with worry. What took so long? He asked. Don't ask, Silas said, swinging into the saddle. Let's go. They rode hard, not stopping until they were well clear of town. Only then did Silas slow his horse and pull the ledger from under his coat. Did you get what you needed? Mara asked, her voice breathless. I got something, Silas said, flipping through the pages. Whether it's enough, we'll find out. They rode back to the ranch in silence, the adrenaline slowly draining from Mara's body and leaving her shaky and exhausted. By the time they reached the house, her hands were trembling so badly she could barely dismount. Silas caught her as she stumbled. You all right? I'm fine, Mara said. Just give me a minute. They went inside and Silas spread the ledger out on the table. Eli lit a lamp and they all leaned in to look. The pages were filled with names, dates, and numbers, records of debts, payments, and interest. Silas ran his finger down the columns, his expression growing darker with each line. Look at this, he said, pointing to an entry. John Carter, borrowed $50 in January, paid it back in full by March. But Crow's got him listed as still owing $70. That's, Mara started. Fraud, Silas finished. And it's not just Carter. Look, half the names in here are the same. People who paid their debts months ago, but Crow's still collecting. Eli's eyes widened. So he's been stealing from them. Worse than that, Silas said. He's been using fake debts to control them, threatening them, manipulating them, all based on numbers he made up. Mara felt a cold fury settle in her chest. What do we do with this? We take it to the sheriff, Silas said. Let him handle it. You think he will? Eli asked. I think he'll have to, Silas said. This is proof. Hard, undeniable proof. Even if he wanted to look the other way, the town won't let him. Mara looked at the ledger, at the rows of names and numbers that represented years of cruelty and manipulation. When do we go? First thing tomorrow, Silas said. That night, Mara couldn't sleep again. She lay in bed, her mind racing, thinking about what would happen when they showed the sheriff the ledger. Would it be enough? Would Crow find a way to wriggle out of it? Would he come after them before they even had a chance to use it? She got up and found Silas at the table again, the ledger open in front of him. He looked up as she approached. Can't sleep? He asked. Can you? Mara countered. Silas smiled faintly. Fair point. Mara sat down across from him. Do you really think this is going to work? I think it's the best shot we've got, Silas said. And if it doesn't? Silas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Then we tried, and that's more than most people can say. Mara looked at him, at the lines of exhaustion etched into his face, the weight he carried in his shoulders. You've been fighting this fight for a long time, haven't you? Longer than I care to admit, Silas said. Why? Mara asked. Why keep fighting when it would be easier to just walk away? Silas looked down at the ledger. Because if I don't, who will? Mara reached across the table and took his hand. You're a good man, Silas Creed. Silas looked at their joined hands, then back at her. I'm not sure about that. I am, Mara said. They sat there in the lamplight, hands linked, and Mara felt something shift between them. It wasn't new exactly. It had been building for weeks, maybe longer, but now it felt solid, real, like something she could hold on to. Mara, Silas said quietly. Yeah? When this is over, he stopped, like he wasn't sure how to finish the sentence. When this is over, what? Mara prompted. Mara. Silas looked at her, and there was something vulnerable in his eyes that made her chest ache. I'd like you to stay. Not because you have to, not because of some arrangement, but because you want to. Mara's throat tightened. I already want to. Silas's expression softened. Good. The next morning, they rode into town together, all three of them. Silas carried the ledger in a saddlebag, and Mara carried her nerve in her clenched fists. Eli rode between them, his jaw set and his eyes forward. The sheriff's office was a small, square building at the edge of town. Silas dismounted and tied his horse to the post outside, then helped Mara down. Eli stayed in the saddle, keeping watch. Inside, the sheriff was sitting at his desk, a cup of coffee in one hand and a newspaper in the other. He looked up as they entered. Creed, he said, didn't expect to see you again so soon. I've got something you need to see, Silas said. He pulled the ledger from the saddlebag and set it on the desk. The sheriff frowned. What's this? Proof, Silas said, that Barrett Crow's been defrauding half the town. The sheriff set his coffee down and opened the ledger. His eyes scanned the pages, his expression growing darker with each line. After a long moment, he looked up. Where did you get this? Does it matter? Silas asked. It might, the sheriff said, if Crow accuses you of stealing it. Let him try, Silas said. What matters is what's in there. You can see it for yourself. Fake debts, inflated interest, people paying twice for loans they already settled. It's all there. The sheriff leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. This is serious. I know, Silas said. If I move on this, Crow's going to fight back, the sheriff said. And he's got friends, powerful friends. He's also got enemies, Silas said. A lot of them. And they're waiting for someone to make the first move. The sheriff was quiet for a long moment. Then he closed the ledger and stood. All right, I'll look into it. That's it? Mara asked, stepping forward. You'll look into it. The sheriff met her eyes. Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but I can't just arrest a man based on a ledger that may or may not have been obtained legally. I need to verify this, talk to people, build a case. That takes time. We don't have time, Mara said. Crow's already threatened to burn down Silas's ranch with us inside. The sheriff's expression hardened. He said that? In front of 6 witnesses, Silas said. The sheriff nodded slowly. All right, that changes things. I'll bring him in for questioning, see what he has to say. And if he denies it, Mara asked, then I'll keep digging, the sheriff said. But one way or another, this ends. Silas extended his hand. Thank you. The sheriff shook it. Don't thank me yet. This is just the beginning. They left the office and mounted their horses. As they rode out of town, Mara felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. They'd done what they came to do. Now all they could do was wait. 2 days later, word came that the sheriff had arrested Barrett Crow. The charges were fraud, extortion, and terroristic threats. The evidence was the ledger, combined with testimony from a dozen townspeople who'd finally found the courage to speak up. Crow's empire, built on fear and manipulation, crumbled in less than a week. His businesses were seized, his debts forgiven, and his name became a curse word in Black Hollow. The news reached the ranch on a cold, clear morning. Silas read the letter from the sheriff aloud, his voice steady but his hands shaking slightly. When he finished, he set the letter down and looked at Mara and Eli. It's over, he said. Eli let out a whoop and threw his arms around Silas. Mara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. She didn't trust herself to speak. Later that evening, after Eli had gone to bed, Mara found Silas standing outside, staring up at the stars. She walked over and stood beside him. You did it, she said. We did it, Silas corrected. Mara smiled. Okay, we did it. They stood in silence for a while, just breathing in the cold night air. Finally, Mara spoke. What happens now? Silas looked at her. What do you want to happen? Mara's heart pounded. I want to stay, here, with you. Silas's expression softened. You sure about that? I've never been more sure of anything, Mara said. Silas reached out and took her hand. His fingers were rough and warm, and they closed around hers like a promise. Then stay, he said. And Mara knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that she would. The weeks after Crow's arrest passed in a strange kind of quiet. Not the tense, waiting for the next blow quiet that had defined their lives for so long, but something softer. Something that felt almost like peace. Mara woke each morning to the sound of Silas chopping wood or Eli whistling as he fed the horses. She made breakfast, cleaned the house, tended the garden they'd started planting now that spring was creeping in. The work was the same, but it felt different, lighter. Like she was building something instead of just surviving. Still, there were moments when the weight of everything that had happened would settle over her without warning. She'd be kneading bread or hanging laundry, and suddenly she'd remember standing in that square with a sack over her head, or the look on Crow's face when he'd threatened to burn them alive. The memories didn't fade. They just became part of the landscape, like scars on skin. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the arrest, Eli came running into the house, his face flushed with excitement. Mara, Silas, you've got to see this! Mara wiped her hands on her apron and followed him outside. Silas was already there, standing in the yard with his arms crossed, looking at something in the distance. A wagon was coming up the trail. As it got closer, Mara saw it was loaded with supplies, lumber, nails, sacks of grain, and more. The driver was a man she didn't recognize, middle-aged with a weathered face and kind eyes. The wagon pulled to a stop, and the man climbed down. "You Silas Creed?" "I am," Silas said carefully. The man extended his hand. "Name's John Carter. I owe you a debt." Silas shook his hand, frowning. "I don't recall lending you money." "You didn't," Carter said, "but you got Barrett Crow arrested. That ledger you brought to the sheriff? My name was in it. Turns out I didn't owe Crow $70 like he said. I'd already paid him back months ago. He was just squeezing me for extra." Silas's expression softened. "I'm glad it helped." "Helped?" Carter let out a short laugh. "You saved my farm. Hell, you saved half the town. So a bunch of us got together and figured we'd return the favor. Got you some supplies here. Lumber for repairs, grain for the winter, whatever else we could scrape together." Mara felt her throat tighten. She looked at Silas, who seemed genuinely stunned. "That's," Silas started, then stopped. "That's not necessary." "Maybe not," Carter said, "but we wanted to do it anyway. You stood up when the rest of us were too scared. Least we can do is make sure you don't regret it." Silas was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you." Carter tipped his hat. "Thank you, Creed, for everything." After Carter left, Silas stood in the yard staring at the pile of supplies like he didn't quite believe they were real. Mara walked over and stood beside him. "You okay?" she asked. "I didn't do it for this," Silas said quietly. "I know," Mara said. "But people wanted to show you they're grateful. Let them." Silas looked at her, and there was something vulnerable in his eyes. "I'm not used to this." "Used to what?" "People caring," Silas said. Mara took his hand. "Get used to it." Over the next few days, more people came by. Some brought food, others offered to help with repairs around the ranch. A few just wanted to shake Silas's hand and say thank you. Each time, Silas looked uncomfortable, like he didn't know how to accept kindness without suspicion. But Mara saw the way his shoulders slowly relaxed, the way he started to smile a little more easily, the way he let people in, just a crack. Eli thrived in the aftermath. With Crow gone, the shadow that had hung over him lifted, and he threw himself into the work with renewed energy. He fixed fences, repaired the barn roof, and even started talking about building a chicken coop expansion. He laughed more, joked more, and slowly started to look like the boy he might have been if life had been kinder. One evening, as they sat around the table after dinner, Eli cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he said. Silas looked up. "About what?" "About Ma and Pa," Eli said. He glanced at Mara. "I know you don't want to see them, and I get it, but I've been thinking maybe I should go back, just to check on them, make sure they're all right." Mara's chest tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. "You want to go back?" "Not to stay," Eli said quickly. "Just to visit. I know what they did was wrong, but they're still our parents, and I—" He stopped, searching for the words. "I need to know they're okay, even if I'm still angry at them." Mara looked down at her plate. Part of her wanted to tell Eli not to go, that their parents didn't deserve his concern. But another part of her understood. Eli was different from her. He still believed in second chances, in forgiveness, in the idea that people could change. She didn't want to take that away from him. "If you want to go, I won't stop you," Mara said finally. Eli nodded, relief flooding his face. "Thank you." "But you don't go alone," Silas said. "I'll ride with you." Eli's eyebrows shot up. "You will." "Someone's got to make sure you get there and back safe," Silas said. "Might as well be me." Mara felt a rush of gratitude towards Silas. He didn't have to do that, didn't have to protect Eli from a confrontation that might go badly. But he was doing it anyway, because that's who he was. They left 2 days later, early in the morning. Mara stood in the yard and watched them ride off, her stomach in knots. She told herself it would be fine, that Eli would say what he needed to say, and then they'd come back and life would go on. But the hours dragged by like days. She tried to keep busy, scrubbing floors, baking bread, mending clothes. But her mind kept circling back to Eli and what he might be facing. Would their parents apologize? Would they try to manipulate him into staying? Would they blame Mara for abandoning them? By the time she heard hoofbeats in the distance, the sun was starting to set. She ran outside and saw Silas and Eli riding up the trail. Eli's face was pale, but calm. Silas looked as unreadable as ever. Mara met them in the yard. How'd it go? Eli dismounted slowly. It was hard. What happened? Mara asked. Eli handed his reins to Silas and walked toward the house. Mara followed. Inside, Eli sat at the table and stared at his hands. Ma cried, he said finally. Soon as she saw me, she just broke down, said she was sorry, that she never wanted to hurt us, that she didn't know what else to do. And Pa? Mara asked. Eli's jaw tightened. Pa didn't say much, just sat there and looked at the floor. I asked him if he regretted it, if he wished he'd done something different. And you know what he said? Mara shook her head. He said he did what he had to do to survive, Eli said. Like that makes it okay. Like survival justifies everything. Mara felt a cold anger settle in her chest. What did you say? I told him survival isn't an excuse for cruelty, Eli said. I told him Mara gave up everything to save me, and he didn't even try to stop it. I told him, his voice cracked. I told him I didn't know if I could forgive him for that. Mara reached across the table and took Eli's hand. I'm proud of you. Eli looked up, his eyes wet. You are. You stood up for yourself, Mara said, and you told the truth. That takes courage. I don't feel very courageous, Eli said. You don't have to feel it for it to be true, Mara said. Silas came in then, his boots heavy on the floor. He looked at Eli, then at Mara, and seemed to understand that the conversation was over. He didn't push. He just nodded and went to make coffee. That night, Mara lay in bed and thought about forgiveness. She'd been carrying so much anger for so long, at her parents, at Crow, at the town that had stood by and watched her humiliation. She'd thought the anger would fade once Crow was gone, but it hadn't. It was still there, a hard knot in her chest that wouldn't loosen. She wondered if Eli was right to try to forgive their parents, if holding on to the anger was hurting her more than it was hurting them. But she also wondered if forgiveness was something she owed anyone, or if it was something she got to choose for herself. She didn't have an answer, not yet. A week later, Silas asked Mara to take a walk with him. It was late afternoon, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air was cool but not cold. They walked in silence for a while, following the trail that led up to the ridge overlooking the ranch. When they reached the top, Silas stopped and looked out over the land. Mara stood beside him, her arms wrapped around herself against the breeze. You ever think about what comes next? Silas asked. Mara glanced at him. What do you mean? I mean after all this, Silas said. After Crow, after everything. What do you want your life to look like? Mara thought about it. I don't know. I've spent so long just trying to survive, I haven't thought much beyond that. Well, think about it now, Silas said. Mara looked out at the ranch below. The house, the barn, the land stretching out in all directions. I think I want this. A place to belong. People who care about me. Work that means something. Silas nodded. That sounds good. What about you? Mara asked. What do you want? Silas was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I want to stop being alone. Mara's breath caught. You're not alone. I know, Silas said. Not anymore. But I was for a long time. And I don't want to go back to that. Mara turned to face him. You won't. Not if I have anything to say about it. Silas looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her heart skip. Mara, He stopped like he was searching for the right words. I'm not good at this, talking about feelings, but I need you to know that you and Eli, you've made this place feel like a home again. And I don't want that to end. Mara's throat tightened. It doesn't have to. I know, Silas said. But I also know you don't owe me anything. You've already given more than anyone should have to. So if you want to leave, if you want to build a life somewhere else, I'll understand. I don't want to leave, Mara said. I want to stay, here, with you. Silas's expression softened. You sure? I've never been more sure of anything, Mara said. Silas reached out and cupped her face in his hands. His touch was gentle, tentative, like he was afraid she might break. Then marry me. Mara's heart stopped. What? Marry me, Silas said again. Not because you owe me, not because of some arrangement, but because I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it. Mara felt tears spring to her eyes. You love me? I do, Silas said. I have for a while now. I just didn't know how to say it. Mara let out a laugh that was half sob. I love you too. Silas smiled, really smiled, wide and genuine and so full of relief that it made Mara's chest ache. Then he leaned down and kissed her. It was soft and tentative at first, like they were both still learning how to do this. But then it deepened, became something more sure, more certain. When they finally pulled apart, Mara was breathless and smiling. Is that a yes? Silas asked. That's a yes, Mara said. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the ranch. The sheriff officiated and a handful of townspeople came to witness. John Carter and his wife, a few of the people who'd brought supplies, and even the doctor who'd set Eli's broken wrist when he'd fallen off a horse the week before. Eli stood beside Silas, grinning so wide it looked like his face might split. Mara wore a simple dress that one of the townswomen had lent her, and she carried a small bouquet of wildflowers that Eli had picked that morning. The ceremony was short and straightforward. No grand speeches, no elaborate vows, just two people promising to stand by each other, no matter what came next. When the sheriff pronounced them married, Silas kissed her in front of everyone, and the small crowd cheered. Mara felt her face flush, but she didn't care. She was happy. Truly, deeply happy. Afterward, they had a small meal at the ranch. People brought food and shared stories. And for the first time in her life, Mara felt like she was part of a community. Not as the scarred woman who'd been sold in the square, but as someone who belonged. As the sun set and the guests started to leave, Mara stood in the yard with Silas, watching the last of the wagons roll away. You happy? Silas asked. I am, Mara said. Are you? Silas pulled her close. More than I thought I'd ever be. They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other, and Mara thought about how far she'd come. From the girl who'd stood in the square with her face covered, to the woman who now stood here, married to a man who saw her as whole. The months that followed were filled with hard work and small joys. Silas and Mara worked side by side, repairing the ranch, expanding the garden, preparing for winter. Eli grew stronger and more confident, his nightmares fading as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months. In the fall, word came that Barrett Crow had been sentenced to 10 years in prison. The news spread through Black Hollow like wildfire, and for the first time, people started to believe that things could change, that bullies could be brought down, that justice, however slow, could still arrive. Mara felt a strange sense of closure when she heard the news. Not forgiveness exactly, but something close to it. Crow would face the consequences of his actions, and she could finally stop looking over her shoulder. One crisp October morning, Mara woke to find Silas already up, standing at the window and staring out at the sunrise. She walked over and slipped her arms around his waist. What are you thinking about? She asked. The future, Silas said. What it might look like. And what do you see? Silas turned to face her. I see us. Here. Building a life. Maybe a family, if that's something you want. Mara's breath caught. She hadn't thought about children, hadn't let herself think about them. But now, standing here with Silas, the idea didn't seem impossible. It seemed hopeful. I think I'd like that, Mara said. Silas smiled and kissed her forehead. Good, because I think I would too. By the time winter rolled around, the ranch was thriving. They'd stockpiled enough food to last through the cold months, repaired the barn, and even added a new section to the house. A small room that Silas said could be for a nursery if they needed it. Eli had grown into a young man, strong and capable, with a quiet confidence that reminded Mara of Silas. He still had moments where the weight of everything that had happened would catch up to him, but they were fewer and farther between. One snowy evening, as they sat around the fire, Eli announced that he was thinking about staying on the ranch permanently. I know I'm not technically family by blood, he said, glancing between Mara and Silas, but this place feels more like home than anywhere else ever has, and I'd like to stay. If you'll have me. Mara felt tears prick at her eyes. Of course we'll have you. Silas nodded. You've always been family, Eli, blood or not. Eli grinned, and the firelight caught in his eyes, making them shine. That night, after Eli had gone to bed, Mara and Silas sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets and watching the snow fall. It was quiet, peaceful, The kind of quiet that came from knowing you were exactly where you were supposed to be. You ever think about that day in the square? Silas asked. Mara nodded. Sometimes, not as much as I used to. You ever regret it? Silas asked. Coming here. Never, Mara said. Not once. Silas took her hand. I'm glad. Mara leaned her head against his shoulder. You saved me, you know. No, Silas said. You saved yourself. I just gave you a place to do it. Mara thought about that. About the girl she'd been in that square, scared and ashamed and convinced her life was over. And about the woman she was now, strong, loved, and finally free. She thought about how easy it would have been to let the bitterness consume her, to let the anger and pain turn her into someone hard and unyielding. But she'd chosen differently. She'd chosen to stay open, to trust, to let herself be loved, and that choice had changed everything. I think, Mara said slowly, that the hardest thing in the world is to stay soft when the world tries to make you hard. To keep hoping when everything tells you not to. But I also think that's the only way to really live. Silas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You're a lot wiser than you give yourself credit for. Mara smiled. I learned from the best. As the snow continued to fall and the night grew deeper, Mara felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She'd been through hell and come out the other side. She'd been broken and put herself back together. She'd been sold for $1 and found something priceless in return. And she knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that no matter what came next, she would be okay. Because she wasn't alone. She had Silas, she had Eli, and she had herself. That was more than enough. Spring came early that year, arriving with a burst of green and the sound of birds returning from the south. Mara planted a garden twice the size of the one from the year before, and Silas built new fences to keep the deer out. Eli learned how to break horses, and the three of them worked together to build a future that felt solid and real. One warm afternoon in late April, Mara was kneeling in the garden, her hands in the dirt, when she felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. She sat back on her heels, pressing a hand to her stomach, and waited for it to pass. Silas was nearby, repairing a section of the chicken coop. He looked up and saw her sitting there, her face pale. You all right? He called. I'm fine, Mara said, but even as she said it, she felt another wave of nausea roll through her. Silas crossed the yard and crouched beside her. You don't look fine. Mara looked up at him, her heart pounding. I think... She stopped, her throat tight. I think I might be pregnant. Silas went very still. You think? I'm late, Mara said, and I've been feeling sick in the mornings. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure, but... Silas pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. We're having a baby, he said, and his voice cracked on the last word. Mara nodded, tears streaming down her face. We're having a baby. They told Eli that evening, and he let out a whoop so loud it startled the horses. He hugged Mara, then Silas, then Mara again, his grin so wide it looked like it might never fade. I'm going to be an uncle, he said, wonderstruck. I'm actually going to be an uncle. You are, Mara said, laughing through her tears. Over the next few months, they prepared for the baby. Silas finished the nursery, Eli built a cradle with his own hands, and Mara sewed tiny clothes and blankets. The townspeople brought gifts, baby clothes, diapers, a rocking chair that one of the older women had used for her own children. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. The baby came in late autumn, just as the leaves were starting to turn. It was a boy, small and red-faced and perfect. Mara held him in her arms and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. Silas stood beside the bed, looking down at them both with an expression of pure wonder. What should we name him? Mara thought for a moment. What about Samuel, after your father? Silas's eyes widened. You'd do that? He's your son too, Mara said, and I want him to carry a name that means something. Silas leaned down and kissed her forehead. Samuel it is. Eli came in a few minutes later and stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed, staring at the baby with a mixture of awe and terror. You want to hold him? Mara asked. Eli's eyes went wide. I don't know how. I'll show you, Mara said. She carefully placed the baby in Eli's arms, guiding his hands to support the tiny head. Eli stared down at his nephew, his face soft with wonder. "He's so small," Eli whispered. "He'll grow," Silas said. Eli looked up at them, his eyes shining. "I'm going to protect him, the way you protected me." Mara felt her throat tighten. "I know you will." As the months turned into years, life on the ranch became something Mara had never thought possible. A life filled with love, laughter, and the kind of quiet contentment that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Samuel grew into a bright, curious boy who followed his father everywhere and drove his mother to distraction with his endless questions. Eli became the kind of uncle who taught Samuel how to ride, how to fish, and how to fix things when they broke. And Mara and Silas built a life together that was messy and imperfect and absolutely beautiful. There were hard days, of course, days when the memories of the past would creep in and steal her breath, days when Silas would retreat into himself, haunted by ghosts he couldn't outrun, days when Eli would wake from a nightmare and need to be reminded that he was safe. But there were good days, too. Days when Samuel would laugh so hard he'd fall over. Days when the three of them would sit on the porch and watch the sunset. Days when Mara would catch Silas looking at her with so much love it made her chest ache. And slowly, carefully, the good days started to outnumber the bad. One evening, when Samuel was 3 and Eli was preparing to take over more of the ranch responsibilities, Mara stood on the porch and looked out at the land she now called home. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, and the air smelled like rain and earth and new beginnings. Silas came up beside her and slipped his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" "How far we've come," Mara said. "How different things are now." Silas nodded. "You ever think about going back to Black Hollow?" Mara considered the question. "Sometimes, but not to stay. Just to remind myself that I survived it." "You did more than survive," Silas said. "You thrived." Mara leaned into him. "We thrived. All of us." They stood there in silence, watching the sunset, and Mara thought about the journey that had brought them here. About the girl who'd stood in a square with her face covered, convinced her life was over. About the man who'd paid a single dollar and given her a second chance. About the boy who'd been saved and had grown into someone strong and good. And she thought about the truth she'd learned along the way, that redemption wasn't something you earned or deserved. It was something you chose. Every single day, you chose to keep going, to keep trying, to keep believing that things could get better. And sometimes, if you were lucky, they did. "I'm grateful," Mara said quietly, "for all of it, even the hard parts, because they brought me here." Silas kissed the top of her head. "Me too." As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear, Mara felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She'd been lost, and she'd been found. She'd been broken, and she'd healed. She'd been sold for $1, and she'd become priceless. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that this life, this family, this love, was worth everything she'd endured to get here. Because in the end, that's what it all came down to. Not the pain or the fear or the moments when you thought you couldn't go on. But the people who stood beside you when you did. The people who saw you at your worst and chose to stay anyway. The people who reminded you, over and over again, that you were worth fighting for. Mara had been given a second chance, and she'd seized it with both hands. She'd built a life out of the wreckage, and it was a good life, a real life, a life worth living. And that, she thought, as she looked out at the ranch bathed in twilight, was the greatest gift of all. Samuel came running out of the house then, his small feet pounding on the porch. "Mama! Papa! Look what I made!" He held up a stick figure he'd fashioned out of twigs and string. It was crooked and messy, and absolutely perfect. Mara knelt down and took it from him. "This is beautiful, sweetheart." "It's our family," Samuel said proudly. "That's you, and that's Papa, and that's Uncle Eli, and that's me." Mara felt tears prick at her eyes. "It's perfect." Silas ruffled Samuel's hair. "You did good, son." Samuel beamed, then ran back inside to show Eli his creation. Mara and Silas watched him go, their hands intertwined. "This is it," Silas said softly. "This is everything." Mara nodded. "Yeah, it is." And as the night settled in around them, Mara thought about all the people out there who were standing in their own squares, covered and ashamed, convinced their lives were over. She thought about the ones who were drowning in debt, or trapped in bad situations, or so worn down by the world that they'd forgotten how to hope. And she wished she could tell them what she'd learned, that sometimes the worst thing that ever happened to you could also be the beginning of something beautiful. That dignity wasn't something someone else could give you or take away. It was something you claimed for yourself. That love, real love, wasn't about being perfect. It was about being seen, scars and all, and choosing each other anyway. But she knew that was a lesson everyone had to learn for themselves. All she could do was live her life in a way that honored the struggle, that proved it was possible to start over, to heal, to build something new from the ashes. And that's exactly what she intended to do. Because Mara Vale, now Mara Creed, had learned that the world could try to break you, but it couldn't take away your choice. The choice to stand up, the choice to keep going, the choice to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. And as long as she had that choice, she had everything she needed. The stars came out fully then, bright and endless, and Mara looked up at them and smiled. She'd come so far. They all had. And she knew, deep in her bones, that they'd keep going. Together. Always together. Because that's what family did. Not the one you were born into, but the one you built with your own hands, out of love and trust, and the unshakable belief that everyone deserves a second chance. And in the end, that was the most important thing of all.